Brent in Cleveland. And Brent writes, would you have interest ever in interviewing drummer Jim Keltner? Given his history with so many classic rock bands, it seems nobody really interviews him. Also, I'm sure you've been asked before, but have you ever been starstruck by a musical guest? Glad you do these mailbags. I'm one of the many people who listen to the replay. Love the show, Brent from Cleveland. Well, thank you, Brent. Sure, I talked to Jim Keltner. Jim Keltner is a Tulsa guy, I believe. So maybe in my many trips to Tulsa, that's somebody that I can grab for a future interview when I'm physically there. That might not be bad. Generally, most of my audience gravitates towards the more harder rock stuff than much of what Jim is known for. But I think it would be a fascinating conversation. I'd be open to having him on. There's a lot of guys like that are sort of, session guys, behind-the-scenes guys that don't get a lot of attention or media. And I love talking to those guys and giving them an outlet and a window. So it's certainly possible. Have I ever been starstruck? I can't remember the last time I really had that happen to me, Brent. One of the things that I really try to do is not behave that way, even if I am a super fan of a particular musician. I learned a long time ago in this business that you can be a fan all you want, but if you behave like a fan and you want to work in this business and have somewhat of a normal dialogue and potential friendship or connection to these artists, the one thing you don't want to do in front of them is fall all over yourself and act like a super fan. It just changes their perception of you very quickly. So many, many decades ago, when I started out in this business, I learned to check that, even if inside I was pretty geeked up. Now, it's really hard. The only guys I would really say that I get that sort of feeling about, being, super fan geeked up, a little starstruck, I guess, if you will, would be probably Aerosmith. Just because they're such a sacred band to me. They were one of those bands that I had the poster on my wall as a little kid. And when I see those guys, even though I know many of them, some of them quite well, it takes me back to being that kid in my bedroom with the bootleg poster up on my wall. But that being said, even so, I don't outwardly project that. And the guy I know in Aerosmith the least is Steven Tyler. So he would probably be the guy that I get the most geeked up about, just simply because I don't know him that well. Met him a few times, interviewed him a couple times, but have, he's the one guy in the band I really don't have any direct contact with. And he's, one of my all-time favorites. So Tyler would be the closest it comes that I could think of off the top of my head. Thank you for the email, Brent. This one comes from Don, and does Don say where he's from? No, he writes, I know you talk a lot about how the Raspberries were your introduction to rock. I was wondering what other power pop bands you are interested in or listen to. Two of my favorites are the Posies and the Shoes. Have you listened to them? Your comments on power pop, please. And that is from Don, and Don does not say what city he's from. Don, I like, more than specific power pop bands, I like the genre because I like and have always liked in the music that I love melody infused with heavy guitars and, crunchy sounds and busy drums. So the Raspberries, to many, are one of the ultimate, if not the ultimate, power pop band. But I'm not going to say that I'm a connoisseur of power pop. I couldn't sit here and rattle off a million other bands that I like, but I like bands that have elements of power pop. For instance, the Struts, a newer band that I love, absolutely have power pop elements. The Knack had power pop elements. Cheap Trick, one of the great power pop bands. So those are the things that come to mind immediately outside of scattered songs of that genre from that era. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I am an expert on power pop. Stars, Starz, song like Cherry Baby, a great power pop song. Gosh, it's so good. Billy Squier's first band, Piper, loved them. So those are some of the power pop things that jump to mind for me. Thank you, Don, for the email. This one comes from Brian, and he's from Phoenix, and he writes, my question is the Australian Unmasked tour for Kiss from, I believe, 1980. It's on the Kissology DVD and on YouTube. On this show, Paul completely changes the way he sings Detroit Rock City, Strutter, etc. Ace sings co-lead vocals with Gene on Cold Gin. They do a weird set list with solo record songs and a lot of Ace material. I've never heard them do this before and wonder if you had any insights to this, especially Paul singing Detroit differently. It sounded amazing and is my favorite version. Brian, I know exactly what you're talking about. He kind of really belts it out and stretches out the choruses or the verses a little bit in Detroit Rock City. And it is 1980. It is Australia. It is the unmasked period for Kiss. And it is a time in history that's very interesting because it was the first tour that band did with a different lineup. The one part of your breakdown of the Kiss Unmasked tour, which, by the way, never took place in America, because Kiss was so down and out in America, outside of one show in New York City at the Palladium in January of 1980 that they used to introduce Eric Carr. That was the only U.S. show they did for the entire Unmasked tour, which in a lot of ways was just a continuation of the Dynasty tour. They used the same stage set and everything. It was the one time Kiss really didn't change anything touring on two albums, Dynasty and Unmasked. One of the reasons why is they were losing money and those records were not successful in America, especially Unmasked, and they didn't even tour for it. But the introduction of Eric Carr into the band, I think, is a big reason why some things changed in the way they delivered songs on the Unmasked tour outside of the U.S. Because Eric was a powerhouse drummer, a completely different style drummer, and also a guy that could sing very well. And I think he really kind of gave the band a revved up approach to the way they played the songs. He really drove the band in a different way than Peter Criss, who was more of a swing drummer, had a totally different feel, and was very unique to Kiss in that regard, in hard rock in that regard. But the arrival of Eric Carr, I think, gave Kiss a big injection of adrenaline. And, yeah, I remember vividly hearing Paul and the way he sings it. Very powerful in his voice, the way he stretches out the verses. I know exactly what you mean because I loved it, too, at the time when I saw it. And I also found it kind of interesting, and you allude to this, that there's a lot of Ace material played live. You know, and I've brought this up to Ace in the past, for all of the issues he said he had with Kiss during his last run with them, which that Unmasked tour certainly was, he was given a lot of rope. He had a bunch of songs he sang on Unmasked, a bunch of songs he sang on Dynasty, and live he was almost equal to Gene and Paul in terms of singing lead. As a matter of fact, the song Talk to Me from Unmasked was a huge hit in Australia. So they performed that live on that tour. So it's interesting where Ace had one foot out the door and was already thinking solo, maybe almost in an attempt to keep him interested and on board with Kiss. Gene and Paul actually gave him more songs on the records and more songs live than they ever had before. But the Unmasked tour never even happened in America, but outside of America, wildly successful and significant because it introduced the late, great Eric Carr. And you're absolutely right, it did rev up the band and rev up even Paul's vocal style a little bit, which, I really liked. I thought there was a lot of energy in it and a lot of, power in his voice at that time. This is Emmett, who is from New Hampshire in the Trunk Nation mailbag. Emmett writes, I took my 20-year-old son to see Sammy in the Circle a couple weeks ago, and it was effing awesome. My son loves Sammy, but was apprehensive about Night Ranger because of the 80s stigma. Okay. Night Ranger rocked. And the next thing I know, he bought that greatest hits CD of theirs. The power of live music and stage presence can alter all perception, and that's why rock will never die. Thanks again for all you do. Rock on, Emmett in New Hampshire. So, Emmett, interesting that your son was, all in on Sammy Hagar, who actually is more of a 70s artist in terms of his history. And I don't quite understand the apprehension about Night Ranger, being that they started in the early 80s. I don't know what he was thinking or what his concern was. One of the big problems or misconceptions about the band Night Ranger is that they're a ballad band because their biggest hit was a power ballad in Sister Christian. But what they really are is anything but that. They are a blazing dual guitar hard rock band and really, really good and really, really underrated in that regard. And it's cool that Sammy had them out on tour on a couple of dates, and I'm glad your son came around and got on board with Night Ranger and is enjoying some of those kick-ass tunes. Thank you for writing, Emmett.